Thanksgiving night. I just wanted to set the turkey down and survive one meal in peace. But my mother-in-law grabbed the microphone, pointed at my cheap dress, and announced to the entire family, "This household feeds her." Laughter erupted. Phones came up recording. I nodded, set down the carving knife. 5 minutes later, the doorbell rang. My lawyer walked in, opened a thick folder, and the whole room went silent as he read the beneficiary's name on the trust fund. My name is Rachel Monroe, and I've learned that the worst humiliations often smell like butter and rosemary. That Thanksgiving evening at my mother-in-law's house on Maple Ridge Lane started like every other me in the kitchen at 6:30 p.m., basting the turkey while Margaret Caldwell held court in her living room, regaling guests with stories about her successful dress boutique in Brookridge. The house pulsed with familiar sounds, football commentary from the flat screen, ice clinking in whiskey glasses, my sister-in-law's twins fighting over the iPad. I inhaled deeply, catching the scent of pie crust browning, green beans simmering with bacon, sweet potatoes caramelizing under marshmallow. This was supposed to be family. This was supposed to be home. Rachel, dear. Margaret's voice cut through the kitchen warmth like November wind. She stood in the doorway, her pearl necklace catching the overhead light, lips pursed in that particular way that meant a performance was coming. "Are you almost done? We wouldn't want to keep everyone waiting while you figure things out." I kept my eyes on the turkey, checking the thermometer. 165 degrees. Perfect. 5 more minutes. Margaret. Oh, good. That gives me just enough time. She clinked her wine glass with her wedding ring, her signature move for commanding attention. The living room chatter died instantly. "Everyone, before we eat, I'd like to share what we're all grateful for this year. After all, Thanksgiving is about acknowledging who provides for this family." My husband Ethan shifted uncomfortably on the couch. At 36, he still couldn't meet his mother's eyes during her speeches. His warehouse manager position at Redline Freight paid decent money, but in Margaret's world, unless you owned the business, you were just another worker ant. And me, a data operations specialist at Northview Analytics, didn't even register on her scale of acceptable careers. "Let's see," Margaret continued, her voice honeyed with false warmth. "Tom and Linda brought that lovely wine from their vineyard tour. Jennifer contributed her famous cranberry sauce. Even little Tommy made place cards at school." She paused, surveying the room like a general reviewing troops. "And Rachel, well, Rachel is here." Uncomfortable laughter rippled through the room. Ethan's cousin Brad already had his phone out, sensing drama worth recording. My hands stayed steady as I lifted the 20-pound turkey onto the serving platter, but inside, something shifted. A tectonic plate of patience finally cracking after 2 years of subtle jabs and public embarrassments. "Actually," Margaret's voice rose, "let's make this educational. Rachel, why don't you tell everyone exactly what you contributed to this meal? The receipts are right there on the counter. Go ahead, read them to us." Ethan finally spoke, weakly. "Mom, come on." No, Ethan. Your wife should be proud of her. Contributions. We're all family here." I looked at the stack of receipts Margaret had deliberately left out. The turkey from Riverside Farms, $87. The wine, $120. The pies I'd baked from scratch. The vegetables. The rolls all itemized. All paid for with the credit card linked to what Margaret assumed was Ethan's account. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that card drew from an allowance I'd set up through my own resources, a detail buried in financial statements none of them had ever asked to see. I set down the carving knife with deliberate precision and pulled out my phone. The text to Arthur Bell took 3 seconds to type. "Activation conditions met. Please come." Then I turned to face my mother-in-law, my voice steady as seasoned cast iron. "You're absolutely right, Margaret. Let's talk about who provides for whom." The first cut came 3 months after our wedding. Ethan and I had just moved into our apartment in downtown Brookridge, nothing fancy. Just a 2-bedroom with good light and a kitchen where I could actually cook. Margaret arrived unannounced at 9:15 a.m. on a Saturday, holding a folder. Financial planning, she'd announced, spreading bank statements across our coffee table. Not hers, ours. Ethan, sweetie, I need to make sure you're not being taken advantage of. I stood frozen in my bathrobe, coffee mug halfway to my lips, as my new mother-in-law proceeded to interrogate my husband about every transaction. Who spent $42 at Northside Book 78 at the Garden Center, Rachel? Don't you think these purchases should be discussed as a family? Mom, Ethan had mumbled. It's our money. Your money, she corrected. Unless Rachel has suddenly started contributing more than her little secretary salary. Data operations specialist. I'd wanted to scream it. With a bachelor's degree in information systems and 5 years of experience at Northview Analytics. But I'd bitten my tongue, a skill I'd perfected over the subsequent year. The cuts multiplied. Every family dinner included a subtle jab about my simple cooking compared to Margaret's elaborate spreads. Every birthday celebration featured a story about Ethan's ex-girlfriend, the pediatrician who got away. Every holiday brought a passive-aggressive gift, a cookbook titled Eating Well on a Budget, a coupon organizer, a book about marrying up that she claimed she'd bought by mistake. Don't let it get to you, Ethan would say afterward, rubbing my shoulders while I rage-cleaned the kitchen. That's just how she is. She means well. But he never confronted her. Not when she accidentally forgot to set a place for me at Easter dinner. Not when she introduced me at her boutique's anniversary party as Ethan's wife. She works in an office somewhere. Not when she sent him apartment listings in neighborhoods I couldn't afford on my little secretary salary, with notes saying, just in case. At work, I excelled. My supervisor at Northview Analytics promoted me twice in 18 months. I automated systems that saved the company 6 figures annually. My colleagues respected me, consulted me, valued my input. But at every Caldwell family gathering, I shrank into the shadow Margaret had crafted for me, the gold digger who'd trapped her precious son. The trust fund existed in a parallel universe, locked behind legal documents I'd signed at 21, a week after my grandmother Evelyn's funeral. The Maple Key Trust, Arthur Bell had explained in his mahogany-paneled office, has very specific activation conditions. Grandmother Evelyn had been a woman who understood humiliation. She'd watched her own daughter, my mother, wither under the contempt of a wealthy husband's family until she'd fled with nothing but me and a suitcase. The trust wasn't just money. It was a fortress built from painful wisdom. The funds remain sealed until you're 30, Arthur had explained. Unless certain conditions arise, marriage is one. But more importantly, he'd tapped a subsection of the document. Public humiliation by a spouse's family triggers immediate full access and enforcement of all protective clauses. Why that condition? I'd asked. Your grandmother believed that money should be a shield, not a sword. But when someone tries to make you feel worthless because they think you have nothing, that's when you show them exactly what you have. I'd almost forgotten about it, honestly. My life with Ethan had been good despite Margaret. We laughed together, supported each other's dreams, built something real. I'd learned to tune out his mother's voice, to focus on our life rather than her opinions. But last month, something shifted. Margaret had started demanding monthly expense reports from Ethan, CCing his siblings. She'd created a family group chat where she'd joke about my contributions to the household. The jokes grew sharper, meaner, more public. Your wife's dress at the charity gala, she'd posted with a photo. I guess some people just don't understand appropriate attire. Thank goodness Ethan can afford to dress himself properly. 37 likes, 12 laughing emojis. Ethan had seen it and said nothing. That night, I'd pulled out the trust documents and reread every clause. Then I'd called Arthur Bell. If activation conditions are met, I'd asked. What happens? Everything changes. He'd said simply, but timing is everything. The humiliation must be public, documented, and undeniable. I'd hung up and waited. knowing Margaret would eventually go too far. She always did. The dining room had become a theater, and Margaret stood at its center, wine glass raised like a conductor's baton. The relatives formed her audience, 23 people crammed around the extended table and spilling into the living room, all eyes fixed on the performance about to unfold. "Since Rachel seems shy about sharing," Margaret announced, her voice carrying that false sweetness that preceded every public execution, "let me help everyone understand how this household really works." Brad's phone was already recording. His sister Jennifer had hers propped against the centerpiece, live streaming to the family Facebook group. The red recording lights blinked like warning signals I'd learned to ignore. This beautiful turkey, $87 from Riverside Farms, paid for by Ethan's credit card. The wine selection, $120, also Ethan's card. The pies Rachel made from scratch. Margaret made air quotes, her diamond rings catching the light. $43 in ingredients. Ethan's card. She picked up the receipts, waving them like evidence in a trial. The new tablecloth she insisted on, $68. The flowers, $35. Even her dress, she gestured at my simple black sheath, probably came from Ethan's account too. Though, clearly, she shops at the bargain stores. Laughter rippled through the room. Uncomfortable, nervous, but laughter nonetheless. Ethan's Aunt Patricia actually applauded. "Mom, please," Ethan said, but his voice barely carried across the table. He wouldn't look at me. "Oh, I'm not done." Margaret was warming to her theme, drunk on attention and Pinot Grigio. "Let's make this educational. Rachel, stand up." I remained seated. "Stand up." Each word dropped like a hammer. In this family, we acknowledge our debts. The room held its breath. Someone, I think it was Cousin Todd, actually zoomed in his camera. I stood slowly, my hands flat on the table. The carving knife lay within reach, its blade reflecting the chandelier's light. "Now," Margaret continued, "read the receipts, out loud. Tell everyone exactly how much my son spends to keep you fed, clothed, and pretending to belong here." "Margaret," I said quietly, "you might want to stop." She laughed, that bright, brittle sound that had soundtracked 2 years of my life. "Or what you'll leave, please. We all know you can't afford to. You're nothing without this family, nothing without my son's money. You came from nothing. You have nothing, and without us, you'd return to nothing." The live stream viewer count had hit 47. Comments were popping up in real time. I saw them reflected in Jennifer's glasses. "OMG. Drama. Is this real?" "Read them," Margaret commanded. "Or should I tell everyone about your mother, the woman who cleaned houses, about your father? Oh wait, where is he exactly? About how you showed up in Ethan's life right when he got his promotion. Convenient timing, wasn't it?" "Mom, that's enough." Ethan finally stood, but Margaret wheeled on him. "Sit down. It's time everyone knew what kind of parasite you married. She contributes nothing. Nothing. She works her little office job, probably filing papers or answering phones, making what, $30,000 a year, 40. That wouldn't even cover the mortgage on this house." "The house you live in?" I asked, my voice cutting through her tirade. Margaret's smile widened. "The house I own, the house where I've graciously hosted you, fed you, welcomed you despite your background. The house at 472 Maple Ridge Lane." Something in my tone made her pause. "Yes, my house. The one your husband grew up in. The one you'll never be able to afford." I pulled out my phone, checking the time. 7:48 p.m. Arthur's text had come through. "Outside, ready when you are." "You're right." "Margaret," I said, loud enough for every phone to pick up clearly. "I should acknowledge who provides for whom. But first, you should know something about that house you're so proud of." The doorbell rang, its chime cutting through the tension like a blade through silk. "Who the hell is that?" Margaret demanded. "Ethan, did you—" "No," I said, walking toward the door with deliberate calm. I did. I opened the door to Arthur Bell, immaculate in his charcoal suit despite the holiday. His assistant stood behind him, carrying a leather portfolio that looked official enough to stop traffic. "Mrs. Caldwell," Arthur said, nodding to me. Then, louder, addressing the room, "I'm Arthur Bell of Harrow and Bell, LLP. I'm here at Mrs. Rachel Caldwell's request to execute certain time-sensitive legal matters that have just been triggered by this evening's events." Margaret's face flushed purple. "This is a family gathering. You can't just—" "Actually," Arthur said, stepping into the room with the confidence of a man who'd done this before, "I can, and I must. The conditions specified in the Maple Key Trust have been unequivocally met." He looked directly at Brad's phone, then Jennifer's. "And I see we have ample documentation." The Maple Key Trust existed because my grandmother Evelyn Monroe understood cruelty dressed in pearls and politeness. She'd built her fortune quietly, methodically, while the world dismissed her as just another war widow running a small lumber mill in Harbor's Bend. Nobody paid attention to the widow buying up timber rights during the recession of the 70s. Nobody noticed when she parlayed those rights into partnerships with development companies hungry for materials during the 80s boom. By the time she died, Monroe Timber Holdings, operating through 17 shell companies, controlled supply chains worth millions. But grandmother Evelyn's true genius wasn't in accumulating wealth. It was in understanding how to deploy it. "Your mother suffered," she'd told me once, sitting in her study surrounded by ledgers and legal documents. I was 19, home from college, watching her frail hands sort through papers with surgical precision. She married into what she thought was love, but his family saw her as an infection. They broke her spirit with 1,000 small cruelties, all while smiling for the cameras. My mother had fled when I was 7, taking nothing from her marriage except me and trauma that never fully healed. We'd lived in a 2-bedroom apartment above a laundromat, my mother working 3 jobs while her ex-husband's family spread rumors about her abandonment and instability. "Money isn't power," grandmother Evelyn had continued. "Money is armor, but armor only works if you know when to reveal it." The trust she created was a masterpiece of strategic planning. $8.3 million in diversified assets, stocks in companies nobody had heard of but everyone depended on, bonds that matured like clockwork, real estate holdings across 3 states. But the crown jewel was the property portfolio managed through Maple Key Property Services, a company that existed primarily on paper and in the very real deeds to 17 residential properties, including 472 Maple Ridge Lane. "I bought that house in '93, grandmother Evelyn had written in the trust documentation. "Margaret Caldwell believes she owns it because her name is on a lease-to-own agreement she signed in '98. What she never read was the subclauses, the fine print, the reversionary rights. The agreement was a work of art. Margaret paid $1 per year to own the house, with the understanding that it would transfer to her estate upon completion of a 40-year term. But buried in Section 18, subsection J, was the moral conduct clause any documented harassment, defamation, or public humiliation of a Monroe family member would trigger immediate reversion of all property rights. She'll never know until it matters, grandmother had predicted. People like Margaret never read the fine print. They assume their privilege protects them from consequences. The trust had other provisions, each more elegant than the last. The activation clause required specific conditions. I had to be over 25, married, and subjected to public humiliation designed to diminish standing within a family unit. The humiliation had to be documented, witnessed by at least 10 people, and involve false statements about financial dependency. Tonight had checked every box with Margaret's signature efficiency. But the trust's true brilliance lay in its retroactive provisions. Every dollar I'd spent on family expenses, every grocery trip, every dinner, every gift had actually come from a Maple Key allowance fund, the credit card Margaret loved to wave around as evidence of Ethan's generosity. It was linked to my trust account, not his. I'd been paying for everything all along, letting them believe what they wanted to believe. The fund also held records meticulous, exhaustive records. Every text message where Margaret called me a gold digger, every email where she'd suggested Ethan could do better, every Facebook post questioning my motives, my background, my worth. Grandmother Evelyn had insisted on documentation protocols, and I'd followed them religiously. Evidence is everything, Arthur had explained during our planning call last week. When we reveal the trust, we also reveal the truth. All of it. The proprietary algorithms I'd developed at Northview Analytics. They were based on systems I'd created in college, predating my employment. The patents were filed under Maple Key Trust, not Northview. My actual income from licensing those patents to Northview and 3 other companies was 7 figures annually, routed through the trust to maintain the fiction of my little secretary salary. Let them underestimate you, Grandmother Evelyn had written in her final letter to me. Let them show you who they are, and when they finally go too far, because they always do show them who you really are. The trust documents contained one more surprise, one I'd specifically asked Arthur to emphasize tonight. The charitable giving provision required the trustee to donate substantially to causes supporting women fleeing abusive family situations. The Margaret Caldwell Women's Shelter, should it ever be established, was already named as a potential recipient. The irony was intentional. Grandmother Evelyn had always appreciated irony. Margaret's voice sliced through the stunned silence like a serrated blade. You need to leave, now. This is my home, my family gathering, and you, she pointed at Arthur with a trembling finger, are trespassing. Actually, Arthur said, setting his portfolio on the sideboard with practiced calm, I'm conducting business with my client on property she has a significant interest in. But we'll get to that. Get out! Margaret's composure cracked completely. She grabbed my wrist, her manicured nails digging in. And you little nothing, you think bringing some strip mall lawyer to my home will change what you are? Get on your knees. The room gasped. Even Brad lowered his phone. I said, Margaret's voice dropped to a venomous whisper, get on your knees and apologize for embarrassing this family, for bringing this circus into my home, for existing in spaces you were never meant to occupy. Mom! Ethan finally found his voice, but Margaret whirled on him. Shut up. You're too weak to see what she is. Fine. I'll handle this myself. She turned back to me, still gripping my wrist. Kneel. Apologize. Or get out of our lives forever. I looked at her hand on my wrist, the 2-carat diamond wedding ring, the platinum band, the age spots she tried to hide with expensive creams. Then I looked at the carving knife on the table, its blade still gleaming with turkey drippings. Slowly, deliberately, I reached for it with my free hand. The room collectively held its breath. Margaret's eyes widened, but she didn't let go. I picked up the knife, feeling its familiar weight, the same Wusthof classic I'd bought for this house 2 years ago, though Margaret had claimed it was a gift from her book club. With careful precision, I set it down on the other side of the platter, far from reach. I'm done with sharp objects for tonight, I said quietly. Then, louder, addressing the room, and I'm done pretending. The doorbell rang again. This time, Arthur's assistant opened it, revealing 2 more people, a court reporter with a stenography machine and a uniformed officer from the sheriff's department, holding official-looking documents. What is this? Margaret's voice cracked. Ethan, call the police. Ma'am, the officer said calmly. I'm Deputy Harrison with the Civil Division. I'm here to serve notice and ensure this proceeding is conducted peacefully. No laws have been broken. Yet. Arthur cleared his throat. Mrs. Margaret Caldwell, you are being formally notified that as of 7:52 p.m. tonight, the activation conditions of the Maple Key Trust have been met. The following will be documented for legal record. He nodded to the court reporter, who began typing. Furthermore, Arthur continued, pulling out his phone, we have video documentation of tonight's events, including demands for physical submission, false statements about financial support, and defamatory claims about my client's background and employment. He turned the screen toward the room, showing Jennifer's live stream. 47 viewers and counting. The comments are illuminating. Margaret finally released my wrist, leaving crescent moon indentations from her nails. This is ridiculous. Whatever she's paying you. My client's net worth exceeds $8 million, Arthur stated flatly. My firm has represented the Maple Key Trust for 31 years. Now, shall we discuss the house you're standing in? Patricia gasped. Todd dropped his beer. Ethan sank into a chair like his strings had been cut. You're lying, Margaret whispered. Arthur pulled out a document, holding it up for the phones still recording. Deed to 472 Maple Ridge Lane, owned by Maple Key Property Services, a subsidiary of the Maple Key Trust. Mrs. Rachel Monroe Caldwell, sole beneficiary and trustee. He set it on the table next to the carved turkey. You've been living here under a very specific lease agreement. Mrs. Caldwell, one you're currently in violation of. The room erupted, everyone talking at once, phones swinging between Arthur, Margaret, and me. The court reporter's fingers flew across her keys, capturing every word. Margaret stood frozen, her face cycling through shades of red and white like a broken traffic light. That's impossible. I own this house. I have papers. You have a lease-to-own agreement with numerous conditions, Arthur corrected. Section 18, subsection J, specifically prohibits harassment or defamation of any Monroe family member. Would you like me to read the transcript of tonight's events? I finally spoke, my voice carrying over the chaos. The answer is no, Margaret. I won't kneel, I won't apologize, and I won't leave. I looked directly at Jennifer's phone, knowing it was still streaming. This family needs to understand exactly who's been feeding whom. The deputy stepped forward, document in hand. Mrs. Margaret Caldwell, you're being served with notice of lease violation and demand to cure or vacate within 30 days. Margaret took the papers with numb fingers, her kingdom crumbling in real time, live-streamed for the extended family's viewing pleasure. Arthur opened the leather portfolio with the solemnity of a priest opening scripture. The room fell silent except for the court reporter's soft keystrokes and the distant hum of the dishwasher I'd started earlier still running through its cycle, indifferent to the drama unfolding. For the legal record, Arthur began, his voice filling the dining room. I am now reading from the primary documentation of the Maple Key Trust, established February 15th, 1991, by Evelyn Marie Monroe. He pulled out a pair of reading glasses, the gesture theatrical but effective. Every phone in the room focused on him. Let me first verify the identity of all parties present. He looked at me. Rachel Ann Monroe Caldwell, born March 3rd, 1990, daughter of Susan Monroe, granddaughter of Evelyn Monroe. Yes, I said. And you are currently married to Ethan James Caldwell, as of September 14th, 2 years ago. Yes. Ethan made a sound half sob, half gasp. I didn't look at him. Arthur continued. The triggering event for activation of full trust benefits requires public humiliation involving false statements about financial dependency, witnessed by 10 or more individuals, with documentary evidence. He gestured to the phones. So, Deputy Harrison, can you confirm the number of witnesses present? The deputy did a quick count. 23 individuals present, sir. And we have video documentation via social media live stream, currently showing. Arthur checked his phone. 92 viewers. The comments section provides additional timestamp verification. He pulled out another document, this one with gold embossing. I will now read the designation of beneficiary, the Maple Key Trust, with total assets valued at $8.3 million as of last quarter's assessment. Names as sole beneficiary and trustee Rachel Ann Monroe. Now, Rachel Ann Monroe Caldwell. Margaret laughed harsh, disbelieving. This is fraud. She's been lying to us for 2 years. On the contrary. Arthur interrupted. My client has never made false statements about her financial situation. She simply chose not to correct your assumptions. However, you, Mrs. Caldwell, have made numerous false statements, all documented." He pulled out a tablet, swiping through screens. "Would you like me to read them? This is entrapment. This is consequence." Arthur corrected. "Now, regarding the property at 472 Maple Ridge Lane." He pulled out another document, this one marked with multiple tabs. "The property has been owned by Maple Key Property Services since 1993. You signed a lease-to-own agreement in 1998, paying $1 per year in rent. Because it was a family arrangement, my late husband's mother had no ownership stake in this property. The seller was Maple Key Property Services, acting through a third-party broker. You never inquired about the actual ownership." Arthur flipped to a tabbed section. "The moral conduct clause, which you initialed here, and here, specifically states that any act of public humiliation, defamation, or harassment toward a Monroe family member immediately triggers reversion of all rights and conversion to market-rate rental." He pulled out his phone again, scrolling. "Shall I read some of your Facebook posts about my client? Or perhaps the group texts where you called her? Let me find the exact quote. A gold-digging parasite who should be grateful we let her clean up after us." Jennifer quietly tried to end her live stream. Arthur noticed immediately. "Please keep recording. Ms. Patterson, this is a legal proceeding, and documentation is essential." He turned back to Margaret. "Current market rent for this property is $4,200 per month. You may continue residing here at that rate, with first month, last month, and security deposit due within 72 hours. Alternatively, you have 30 days to vacate." "This is my house." Margaret's voice broke. "I've lived here for 26 years. I raised my children here." "In a house owned by my client's trust." Arthur said simply. "Additionally, there's the matter of the credit card you've been so fond of mentioning tonight." He pulled out bank statements. "Account ending in 4379. Correct, the one that paid for tonight's dinner." Margaret nodded numbly. "That account is linked to the Maple Key Trust Allowance Fund. Every dollar spent on family expenses for the past 2 years has come from my client's money. The turkey you mocked her for buying, she paid for it. The wine hers. The very clothes your son wears to work, purchased with her funds." Arthur spread the statements on the table like tarot cards revealing a fortune. Total household support from the trust $187,000 over 2 years, not including the below-market rent you've been paying on this house, which represents an additional subsidy of approximately $98,000 in forgiven market rent. Ethan finally spoke, his voice hollow. "Rachel, is this true?" I looked at my husband, really looked at him for the first time tonight. His face was pale, confused, lost. Every word. But why didn't you tell me? Would it have changed how you let her treat me?" The silence that followed was answer enough. Arthur wasn't finished. "There's one more matter. The trust includes provisions for charitable giving. My client has directed me to establish the Margaret Caldwell Foundation for Women's Financial Independence, with an initial endowment of $500,000. He looked directly at Margaret. "Your name will be permanently attached to supporting women who've been financially controlled or abused by their families. Congratulations. You'll be famous for something worthwhile." The silence that followed Arthur's announcement was absolute, the kind that makes you aware of your own heartbeat. The refrigerator's hum, the tick of the grandmother clock Margaret claimed was a family heirloom but actually came from an estate sale in Columbus. Then, chaos. Brad's phone slipped from his fingers, clattering on the hardwood floor. Jennifer frantically tapped at her screen, trying to delete the live stream that had already been shared 17 times. Cousin Todd backed away from the table like the documents might be contagious. "You're rich." Ethan's voice came out strangled. "You've been rich this entire time." I met his gaze steadily. "I've never needed anyone to feed me." Patricia, Margaret's sister, laughed sharp and nervous. "This has to be a joke. Some kind of Thanksgiving prank." "Right. Margaret, You're all in on this." Margaret stood frozen, the service papers crumpling in her grip. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound emerged. For the first time in 2 years, Margaret Caldwell had no words. Arthur continued with surgical precision. "There's also the matter of defamation. The live stream captured multiple false statements about my client's employment. For the record, Mrs. Caldwell's position at Northview Analytics involves proprietary algorithm development. Her annual licensing fees from patents registered under the trust exceed $700,000. She said she was a data operations specialist," Margaret whispered. "She is. She operates on data that companies pay millions to access." Arthur pulled out another document. "Screenshot from tonight's live stream. Timestamp 7:41 p.m. You stated, and I quote, 'She works her little office job, probably filing papers or answering phones.' That statement has been viewed by," he checked his phone, "137 people and counting." The court reporter's fingers never stopped moving, capturing every word for the permanent record. Uncle Tom, who'd been silent in the corner nursing his whiskey, finally spoke. "So when you said she contributes nothing, she's been paying for everything," Ethan said flatly, the truth settling over him like a shroud. "The groceries, the utilities, even my car insurance. That's why you never wanted me to look too closely at the finances, isn't it, Mom? Because Rachel's name was on everything." Margaret's carefully constructed composure finally shattered. "She deceived us. She let us believe." "You believed what you wanted to believe," I said quietly. "You never asked about my work because you'd already decided I was beneath you. You never looked at the bank statements closely because you assumed Ethan was handling everything. You never questioned where the money came from because it didn't occur to you that it might be mine. Every family dinner where you made me sit at the kitchen counter because the dining table was full," I continued, my voice gaining strength. "Every birthday party where you introduced me as Ethan's wife without using my name. Every holiday where you gave me cleaning supplies as gifts while everyone else got jewelry I paid for all of it. I funded my own humiliation." Jennifer's husband, Mark, a tax attorney who'd been studying the documents Arthur had spread out, whistled low. "This is ironclad, Margaret. You need a lawyer, now." "I don't need a lawyer." Margaret's voice cracked. "I need my son to stand up for his mother, Ethan. Tell them this is our home." Ethan looked at the papers, then at me, then at his mother. I can't. It's not our home. It never was." He turned to me, his eyes desperate. "Rachel, we can work this out. We're married. What's yours is mine. Right community property." Arthur cleared his throat. "Actually, Mr. Caldwell, you signed a postnuptial agreement 13 months ago. You thought it was insurance paperwork. Page 47 of the document you initialed stated that all trust assets remain separate property. You tricked me. You didn't read what you signed," I said, "just like your mother." The room erupted again. Accusations flew. Patricia accused me of fraud. Todd threatened to call real police. Jennifer's teenage daughter, who'd been recording everything on TikTok, already had 3,000 views. Through it all, Margaret stood silent, her empire collapsing in real time. Finally, she spoke, her voice small and broken. "The charity. The foundation with my name. You're going to make me a joke." "No," I said, standing to face her directly. "I'm going to make you a lesson. Every woman who receives help from that foundation will know that Margaret Caldwell's cruelty funded their freedom. Your legacy won't be this house or your boutique or your perfect family gatherings. It will be the women who escape situations like the one you tried to trap me in." Arthur pulled out one final document. "There's also a cease and desist order. Any further public statements, social media posts, or communications that reference my client's personal life, finances, or character will result in immediate legal action. The defamation suit is already prepared. Damages are estimated at $2.3 million. Margaret swayed on her feet. Ethan reached for her, but she slapped his hand away. "Don't touch me," she hissed. "This is your fault. You brought her into our lives. You were too weak to control her, and now—" She gestured wildly at the ruins of her Thanksgiving. "Now we have nothing." "You have exactly what you've always had," I said. "Your son's actual salary, your boutique, your real assets. You just don't have my money anymore, and you don't have me to blame for your unhappiness." The deputy stepped forward. "Ma'am, do you understand the service papers you've been given?" Margaret nodded mutely. "Aging 10 years in 10 seconds. Then my job here is done." He tipped his hat to Arthur, then to me. "Happy Thanksgiving, folks." As he left, the family began to scatter. Phones disappeared into pockets. Conversations died. The feast on the table sat untouched, growing cold under the chandelier's unforgiving light. The relatives fled like roaches when the lights come on. Patricia mumbled something about needing to get home before 9 p.m. Todd suddenly remembered he had an early flight. Jennifer's family vanished without even taking their coats, leaving them draped over chairs like shedskins. Within 10 minutes, only Margaret, Ethan, Arthur, and I remained in the dining room that had hosted its last Caldwell family gathering. Arthur packed his documents with methodical precision. "Mrs. Caldwell," he said to me, "not Margaret. I'll file the necessary paperwork tomorrow morning. The property management company will contact Margaret about the rental terms by Monday." He placed his card on the table. "Call if you need anything." The court reporter had already left, her transcript complete, the machinery of justice set in motion. Arthur nodded to me once a small gesture of professional satisfaction and departed, leaving us in the wreckage of Margaret's empire. Margaret stood by the window, staring at her reflection in the dark glass. 26 years in this house, and she'd just learned she'd never owned a single brick of it. The champagne flute in her hand trembled, casting dancing shadows on the wall. 2 years, Ethan said, still seated, still stunned. 2 years of marriage, and you never told me. 2 years of marriage, I replied, and you never defended me, not once. That's not I tried to. You told me to keep the peace. You told me that's just how she is. You told me to be the bigger person while she made me smaller every single day. I walked to the table, surveying the untouched feast. The turkey had gone cold, its skin losing its golden sheen. The gravy had formed a skin. The cranberry sauce sat pristine in Margaret's crystal serving bowl, the one she'd inherited from her mother. She'd told everyone, though I'd seen the home goods sticker residue on the bottom. Slowly, deliberately, I picked up the carving knife one more time. Margaret turned from the window. "What are you doing?" I didn't answer. Instead, I carved a perfect slice of turkey breast, the knife gliding through the meat with practiced ease. I placed it on my plate, the chipped one Margaret always assigned to me, the one from the old set relegated to the basement. I added mashed potatoes, green beans, stuffing. I poured gravy over everything, took a dinner roll, buttered it carefully. Then I sat down at the head of the table, Margaret's seat, and began to eat. "You can't," Margaret started. "I paid for it," I said between bites. "Every dollar. I'm going to enjoy it." The turkey was perfect moist, flavorful, seasoned with herbs I'd grown in the garden Margaret claimed credit for. I ate slowly, savoring each bite, while Margaret and Ethan watched in stunned silence. "This doesn't have to end our marriage," Ethan said desperately. "We can get counseling, start over, move somewhere new." I set down my fork and looked at him. Really looked at him. 36 years old, still dressed in the polo shirt and khakis his mother had picked out, still waiting for someone else to make the hard decisions. "Ethan," I said gently, "we both know this ended the moment you chose silence over standing up for me. Every time you let her insult me, you were telling me exactly how much I was worth to you." "But I love you." "You love the idea of me, the quiet wife who keeps the peace and doesn't make waves. But that was never who I was. That was who I pretended to be to survive this family." Margaret finally found her voice. "You're divorcing him after destroying our family. You're abandoning him too. I'm setting him free, I said, returning to my meal. Free to find someone you approve of, someone whose mother cleaned houses for the right families, someone whose father is present and accounted for, someone who needs your son's money and will be properly grateful for it. I finished eating, wiped my mouth with one of Margaret's monogrammed napkins, and stood. The house felt different already, no longer a hostile territory, but a conquered one. The chandelier light seemed softer, the shadows less oppressive. The movers will come Friday, I said. I'll be taking my grandmother's furniture from storage pieces Margaret would have appreciated if she'd known their value. Ethan, you have 48 hours to decide what you want from the apartment. After that, I'm donating everything to the women's shelter. I walked to the door, then paused, looking back at the scene, Margaret still by the window, Ethan at the table surrounded by cold food and empty chairs, the grandfather clock ticking toward 9 p. Oh, and Margaret. I said, the proprietary algorithms I developed. One of them analyzes social media patterns to identify financial abuse in relationships. Your live stream tonight will become part of the training data. Thousands of women will learn to recognize the warning signs because of you. So thank you for that. I left them there in the house that was never theirs, with the meal I'd paid for growing colder by the minute. Outside, the November air bit sharp and clean. Arthur's town car waited at the curb he'd arranged it, knowing I'd need an exit strategy. As we pulled away from 472 Maple Ridge Lane, I saw the dining room lights go out one by one. Tomorrow, the legal machinery would continue turning. Papers would be filed. Accounts would be separated. The divorce would proceed with mechanical precision. But tonight, for the first time in 2 years, I was full. Not just from the dinner, but from the satisfaction of finally showing them exactly who they'd been trying to break. My phone buzzed with notifications. The live stream had gone viral. Messages poured in from women who recognized their own mothers-in-law, their own silent husbands, their own diminished selves in my story. I turned off the phone and leaned back in the leather seat, watching the suburban houses blur past. Somewhere behind me, Margaret was learning what it felt like to lose everything she'd never really owned, and Ethan was discovering that the price of peace is sometimes your soul. The turkey had been perfect, though. I'd have to remember that recipe. Thank you all for listening to my story tonight. I'm curious to know where in the world you're hearing this. Please drop a comment and let me know what country or city you're from so we can connect across the miles. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and share your own thoughts about standing up for yourself or dealing with difficult family dynamics. Your experiences matter, and I'd love to hear them.